Okay, so hello, Internet. We should be on the YouTubes at this moment, or maybe 5 seconds from now, depending on delay. What's up, Nick? Been a while.
Hey, yeah, pretty good.
Pretty good. Feeling solid.
Solid, yes,
Sweet.
very solid.
Ryan. So the show, first of all, is it Carniato? Is that how I say your name?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Carniato. Yeah.
And I assume Ryan was also correct because you didn't correct me. That one's rather common. The show is conversational. Like I said, it's for fun. Feel free to bounce things, ask us questions, tell stories, whatever makes sense in the moment. We do have our own kind of outlines and questions, but we're willing to let it go where it goes. Obviously, we do want to hear Solid's origin story to a certain degree, where it fits into the mix. We're planning on talking about some of the benchmarks you have on the website. Obviously, we'll have questions as we go. Some of us are React people, some of us are not. Amelia's big svelte. I still use jQuery most of the time because I'm hardcore / lame. Nick uses React in his day-to-day, but you've also used lots of stuff in terms of front-end frameworks. So we all have kind of differing perspectives on that. We want to talk community. Anything specific that you want to make sure that we discuss on the pod?
Not really. I'm sure we're going to hit most of the kind of introductory topics.
Yeah.
Introducing me, introducing Solid. So I think that'll be fine.
Sweet. Let me put a couple of messages out now that we're live.
Is there anything you don't want to talk about?
I don't think so. I can't think of anything offhand. I'm pretty open with discussing stuff and opinions, even comparisons. Those things don't bother me. I spend a lot of time writing articles and doing benchmarking, so I'm always in that kind of position. I feel perfectly comfortable talking about other frameworks and stuff because I spend a lot of time understanding them.
Awesome.
Nick, is there anything you don't want to talk about?
jQuery? No.
Okay, I'll be quiet. No. I don't advocate for continued jQuery use. I just do it myself because I'm a old codger at this point, and I don't have the problems that y'all have. I
mean-
use small one-person applications that.
But I
don't
mean,
just-
you saw the post from like the Amazon.com people or somebody from Amazon.com earlier this week where they were saying that the front end on the actual website was still mostly just jQuery for like the critical delivery stuff. So it's still out there, and big
Yeah, I've
e-commerce
seen
company.
Yeah. I mean, they're a pretty decent company. I've seen like the 80% extant on websites to this day, or at least to the last year. I didn't see the Amazon one.
Yeah, it was a bit of thing because like it was a little baity of a post because like the headline was like React SSR is not fast enough for Amazon.com. Essentially was the takeaway. So it's interesting. I don't know if you guys also know this, but I work at eBay, e-commerce, and
Sure.
similar kind of background there, and I also work on a different JavaScript framework there. That's my day job. So
Okay, we did notice that. We were gonna ask about
Is that
so-
Marco?
yeah, that's Marco.
Yeah. So that'll
Nice.
probably come up because that was in someone's list
Yeah.
of questions. So I'm also starting this brand new segment today. I just tweeted about it, and it looks like I got one. JSConf MX. I'm calling it Holla, and I have an intro. This is where we just holla at some community event that's going on soon, or a meetup group or something. So this will be like something I'll do at the top of the show as I intro people, and it'll just be a real quick thing. Gonna give that a shot today and see how it goes, just to help spread the news about different things going on around the community. So that also is gonna happen. Okay, any other thoughts or questions? We are live, and I'm gonna put the tweet out that says that we're live now, and then we'll start the show.
The one that went out this morning had all the links and stuff, right? I
Yep.
think I already retweeted all that.
Yeah, I just
okay.
at this time I just quote tweet that and basically say we're live, just because it's
Yeah, makes sense.
all the
Cool.
info's already there. Cool. All right, that's out. Mentioned it in our channel. Everybody's good. Okay, we're all recording. Feeling good. I got the intro song started, and then we'll start. I should get my timer out too. Always the last thing. That I forget. I lose track of time. All right. Here we go. Can y'all hear that? Oh, hi. Hello there, friends. It is Jerod here, your internet friend, and I have a great show for you prepared today. I am joined by a few of our regular co-hosts. Amelia is here. What is up, Amelia?
Hey, not much.
Not too much. Nick Nisi also in the house. What's up,
Ahoy,
Nick?
hoy.
Hoy hoy to you. And special guest from the SolidJS project is Ryan Carniato. Thanks for joining us, Ryan.
Hi, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
We're glad to have you. We're happy to hop into all the details of this very cool UI library that I want to call it new, but it's not all that new. It just feels new because it's kind of bubbling up into the zeitgeist. But first, we're going to start with a brand new mini segment called Holla.
Can I holla? Can I holla at you? Can I holla at you? Can I holla, 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 holla.
Holla is a new segment where we holla at some upcoming meetups, events, conferences, things going on around the JavaScript, CSS, web dev community. So I put out a tweet requesting hollas, and we got a quick response from JSConf MX in Mexico, and I believe it's one of their organizers. Said we at JSConf MX could use a holla. We are posting last year's talks in the JSConf YouTube channel in Spanish and in English. So that's very cool. That was Rodrigo who says that. So holla at JSConf MX. We will link up their website in the show notes and take a look at their talks, which they're uploading to YouTube. All right, let's dive right in, Ryan. So as I said before, SolidJS, it feels new. It's getting, I think, increased eyes and interest. It is very much a front-end library for UIs. Is it a framework? I don't know. Is it a library? Maybe part of the conversation. But it's not all that new, 2018. So you've been working on that for a while. Tell us kind of the origin story, how SolidJS came to be, and what you're trying to do in the space.
Yeah, definitely. And even the 2018 is kind of a little bit misleading because I wasn't very, I guess, open in the open source that much. I wasn't very social. I was just a developer working on a team, working on a startup, a small company out of Vancouver, Canada. And we were a company who had built our stack on Knockout.js and CoffeeScript. And this is like 2010, 2012 period. And I joined the company in 2012. And I was just working there as a developer. And I joined a team that was actually trying to build libraries because if JavaScript at that time period didn't have that many there's less stuff out there, and I happened to chance myself by complete randomness to the creator of a library called Knockback, which was like a backbone JS knockout kind of framework, and I just started working there. We built our own ORM because we wanted to do GraphQL type stuff. Before GraphQL, it was all about like linking models and requesting from the client, and a whole bunch of kind of interesting projects like that. In a startup, which was under-resourced, underfunded. So I don't know if that was the best move, but that I kind of got into that zone. And then what happened was my I guess mentor leadership. He left. He kind of burnt out on the whole startup thing, doing it all himself. And I was kind of left being in charge of all the technical stuff. And our stack was aging, and I wanted to maybe move off it to something else, but React wasn't what we liked. It was just we'd become accustomed to different patterns. We'd accustomed to using reactivity and these like composable primitives. And really Knockout.js had this pattern for years. So I actually started on Solid in about 2015. And my first like commit in a private repo was in 2016, but I was just building it for myself, maybe my company. I didn't really think anyone else would use it. Everyone seemed to like React. They liked life cycles and classes and all that. For me personally, I go back a little further, but it reminded me of .NET, and I mean that's kind of weird, but when I'd found Knockout, when I'd found these kind of composable primitives, I never wanted to go back to classes and life cycles and all that kind of stuff again. And the reactive stuff, I could tell was it updated performantly and all this, and I just this whole idea of like the VDOM top-down rendering, it just never jived with me. So I just kept on trying to work on it, and eventually Knockout kind of fell out of favor. People, didn't care about it, and I just kind of did my thing. And I built some benchmarks, and I worked through that, and that's what got me to open source the library, because I was like, oh, I want to participate in some benchmarks. I think I found a way to make this approach performant. And what ended up happening was, I was just still kind of fine doing my own thing, and then React released React hooks. And I was like, wait, what? It looked identical to Solid, and I was like, okay, well, this changes everything. People might actually be interested in this, and that's when I started writing articles and started kind of putting it out there. But this was always like at the beginning, for years, just me kind of tinkering on my own kind of personal project, trying to, see if I could take my favorite paradigm and show that it was like performant, and that maybe my company would use it. Ironically, when the decision did come, which was also around 2018, and I was kind of, as I said, in charge of those kind of decisions, I steered everyone to React. But I mean, it's just, well, we'd spent years maintaining our own stack and dealing with that, and that was the wrong move, I think, for a startup that needed to deliver a product. But I mean, that experience for me was amazing, because it's a different space. What kind of, where its origin came from. You can see that reflects in the design and all the decisions, because you guys had Rich on recently, and he was talking about, like almost like the agency mentality, or like media, where it was just constant in and out, doing these small projects and then moving on to the next one, onboard people quickly. That's the mentality. I wanted to create something that would last years, that you wouldn't hate your code base after 2 or 3 years, that like was made specifically to be modular and made for change. And that's a different thing, because in a world where React has permeated everywhere and it's really hard to get an edge or get a footing, most frameworks have focused on lowering the floor, like letting people in easier. That wasn't my priority. I wasn't changing the product. I just wanted to allow people to have the most control, and to, like, as I said, not hate their code base after two or 3 years. So I mean, that's kind of where Solid came from. It was me taking arguably old patterns, things that people have done before, and then just kind of modernizing it. And like that, it's kind of fundamental in my belief in how I look at this ecosystem. When you look at the way front end's progressing, when you look at the way JavaScript technologies progress, and the latest things comes out, and there's this fear of missing out, and the whole, like, how should I put it, like JavaScript fatigue. I've never felt it myself so much, but it's mostly from this kind of understanding, is that almost everything new you see, the things that you can't miss out on, they were already there. Like, if you looked hard enough, they were there 5 years ago, they were there 10 years ago, and it's just a matter of, like, when it becomes popular that it comes into light. Like, as you said, Solid's been around for a while. Right now, people are seeing it, and people look at the benchmarks and they look at that. But truth of the matter is, there has been a lot of advances in different ways, and a lot of frameworks have gone more performant and improved DX over time. But like for Solid, the performance that you see in those benchmarks, we had that performance in 2016. I haven't touched that in like 5 years. Like, sometimes the solution's already there. Sometimes it just takes a while to come back again. So, yeah.
That's such a. Sorry, go ahead, Nick.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say that's such a good story, and I feel like I look at Solid, and it's such like if I were to imagine being like, okay, tomorrow I'm gonna start building, a framework, it would be totally overwhelming, and I wouldn't know where to start. And I'm super curious, like, has Solid changed over the years as you've been working on it, like the code base or the concepts that are involved.
Yeah, I mean, it has changed somewhat. And Codebase, definitely. Solid was written in CoffeeScript, like just off that. And then I converted it to JavaScript, and then I converted it to TypeScript. I'm like trailing on the TypeScript side. TypeScript was the hardest adjustment.
And when are you
for
going to
me.
convert it back to JavaScript?
Never.
Yeah, I mean, that's the next trend, right?
That's the next move. Yep, just wait.
Yeah,
It's
I
happening.
mean, it's been tempting at times. I
Rust.
mean, sometimes the typing is challenging, and I thank the community for that because that is not my forte. As a guy who came up in CoffeeScript, you know, when I went back to web dev after my .NET dark ages, essentially that was all about like prototyping. You don't even declare variables in CoffeeScript. Like you literally just kind of like have an idea, spit it out on the page. I've never felt more productive, whether that productivity caused someone to come by later and have to fix it. But you remember I was like the lead dev at a startup and there were some other developers. I probably left a huge wake in my trail. I'd be like, okay, yeah, we should just rewrite this whole thing. So I'll go do that tonight. And when you come back tomorrow morning, I will refactor the whole thing, right? And then be like, look, 10x developer here, right? And then like the next 10 days when everyone else is fixing bugs. Like I'm sure I did that. But yeah, it's a different mentality here. But in terms of the actual mechanics, that hasn't changed very much. And I think like there's been evolutions in reactivity to make the execution more predictable. There's been advances in tooling, you know, like JSX has actually became a very important part of our puzzle, even though I didn't realize it at first. I did start with like template DSL type things like Svelte or Vue, but it was still pretty early on. Like I made the switch to JSX in 2017. It just, the core paradigm and composability were just so strong and so powerful. And yeah, it's hard to explain sometimes. It's easier to show, generally speaking, but with Solid, the mentality is very much one where and I know this is a weird one, but people who come in and get hooked on Solid, the thing that they tend to walk away with is they're like, oh, I could have written this framework. It's very, very different. Where I've realized over time, even though it's funny, like because like Solid and Svelte look like siblings sometimes. People are like, oh yeah, compilers, smart stuff, all this stuff. Someone the other day said we're like Solid and Svelte are like the Angular and Reactive, like the next generation of frameworks. And I started realizing we're actually very, very different because like on the Svelte side, it's more like we keep the syntax, we keep everything very simple. Like you don't have to know how this works underneath. We've abstracted to you. It's just a language, just like something you can pick up and use. But like I know, maybe not everyone cares about it, but I know exactly what's going on behind it. But like it's much more complicated than what you see, and it's like it's a different kind of gap, right? Where it's like, okay, just write simple JS and it just updates, versus like here is a framework that wears itself on its sleeve, so to speak. That it shows out like. When I kind of introduce people to Solid now, I've taken a different tact. Like when I'm not saying like here compare it to React because that's everyone's first kind of view of it. It starts from a place of actually like a state library. Like I just go here, write some console logs to the console. You know, here's a reactive variable, and it'll write to the console. And then the next thing I do would it be like, okay, replace that console log with updating a DOM element that you created. And then replace that DOM element with a JSX element. Like Solid doesn't really have components. It's not it's not the top-down renderer that you see, and that makes it very, very different in a sense because in a lot of ways, even Svelte is more similar to React than it is to Solid in the mechanical side, not on the philosophy side. The philosophy side, this is actually pretty complicated stuff, I guess. But the philosophy side, Solid's very much on the React side, where we like things to be explicit and we like things to kind of be these base primitives. We don't kind of hide stuff, so it's kind of like you learn these hooks, that apply them how you like, but that's essentially all you ever need. It's not a progressive framework, you know, like that's like the Vue marketing or Svelte, where it's like you learn the one way and then you build upon it and learn more and then you learn more. So it's like, look, this is all we got. This is the whole thing. Maybe you could build it yourself. That's the angle. Maybe not the most beginner-friendly angle, but it's like once you get over that little, like that ledge, you're suddenly like, oh, I could do anything with this.
So it's been fast since 2016. It's been open since 2018. When was it that you advised your company to pick React? Was that 2018? Was that in that time frame?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We were
Okay.
preparing for a rewrite for 2019 that we were going to start like the following year, and it was a difficult choice. I actually recommended Preact because we're starting to see work towards Preact 10, and I'm like, oh, by the time it'll be in the right place. But it was, and we did start on Preact. It was just like a little bit too early days. Some stuff like suspense and hooks weren't right. And the biggest reason we made the move to React or Preact was we were finally like, okay, there's hooks now in React. Maybe this will fit our pattern. We like those composition patterns. Like it was really important to us that you could like make your own custom hooks and break up logic that way. We've been using those patterns for like most of a decade, and essentially like that was the differentiator. Before that, I mean, we had experience. We had React Native for our mobile app, so we knew how to do React, but
Yeah.
it wasn't as compelling until hooks came out. The interesting thing, of course, is hooks have hook rules and stuff, and that's something that took a little bit longer to appreciate. And actually, as I said, sort of is one of the more standout things with Solid in that it looks kind of like React hooks, but it doesn't have the hook rules, and the execution model is very different.
So put yourself back in those meetings, only it's 2022. Does your advice change now, or would you still say the same thing?
Here's the thing: when you have a company like a startup or whatever, you have to make a decision. I think you get a certain number of like innovation credits, so to speak, like how many things where you can bet on a technology or not. I feel like in 2022 right now, Solid would be an okay bet for like a startup like that's trying to kind of, they're like, okay, we decided that this element of it is important to us. We'd have to make that decision if we were going to build our own design system or build something, use like Material UI or something. That would be part of that decision process. And at my startup, we built our own design system, own component lines, everything. We'd have to rebuild everything anyways. So it wasn't really like the ecosystem wouldn't have been as big of a factor. And I think today, especially if I was working there too, but that definitely would have gone to the way of Solid. It was just at the time, I didn't feel comfortable enough recommending it simply because we'd kind of gone through that. And we got up through the other side, right? We built a bit in Preact and we switched to React, and they finished the app in React, and they're like, it wasn't like a clear win over like what we were doing previously. They're like, a lot of stuff doesn't work as well as it used to do, like in a different sense, and there's like new things we have to be aware of. It wasn't like, just like all sunshine, so to speak. But I mean, there was some good benefits for the startup. Hiring new people on was easier because we'd be like, we're just a React shop, and they'd be like, okay, and so we could get, junior developers easier and stuff. I don't think that's actually, if you're going to teach people stuff anyways, I don't think it's that big of a boundary using something like Solid, because there's a lot of similarities on the superficial, like on the surface level, that make it work fine. And I also, spent like most of a decade teaching people Knockout, like how reactivity works. So I feel more comfortable about it now. But yeah, I think it took a long time for us to get to 1.0, even though the client side stuff was really stable. I'm just very careful. I don't like putting my stuff out there before it's ready, so to speak. I'm pretty risk averse, so it would taking quite a while. It probably, I wouldn't have chosen Solid for my startup till about the 1.0 release time period, which is basically this summer. So I feel things have gone to that point. There's a community behind it. It's not me anymore. There's 6 members on the core team. There's more things that make this choice more attractive than it would have been before. There's some momentum. It is interesting because that technology decision is one that does tend to stick with you for years. And back in like 2011, 2012, you might have not cared as much in a different way, because people were willing to be like, okay, Ember, Angular, some JavaScript framework that no one's heard of that's already dead. It was like a different time. The mentality around like you have to do React or you can't hire people has kind of influenced things now in a harder way. So I think it's harder to make that decision in general. But I think that at this point, I would be plenty happy to take on Solid or Svelte. I mean, Svelte's a different category, but I mean, I was pretty hot on Svelte even from like 2019. Since Svelte 3 came out, I was like I don't see why people wouldn't use this. So maybe my kind of bias is in there. Maybe I am more risk taking in that side because I understand how these things work than others would be. But today I would recommend it.
All right, we'll break right there. Looks like you guys were leaning in to ask your next question, so I hopped right in and broke it. But I think Amelia or Nick, feel free to open the next segment with a follow up. It's fine. We can relax for a sec. We can start right back in, get a drink of water. Ryan's doing most of the heavy lifting, so he probably needs to wet his palate.
Yeah, no, it's good. Typical kind of questions. I hope. It's funny. So much of my experience was those years in that startup. I don't know if it's still your boss, Amelia. He was my mentor. What?
Adon?
No, I guess bigger boss. Jason Warner. He
I think he's moved on, hasn't he?
has he moved on?
He was my boss for I joined the office of the CTO, and then 3 months later, the CTO left. I didn't do it. It's not because I joined.
That's interesting. Yeah, see, that's exactly it. I haven't even kept up on it. It was funny because in my startup when everyone took off, I was left by myself, and the CEO was like the only one left. There's no CTO, no CO, no nothing, and she actually pulled Jason in to be like, hey, this is Salesforce days, but okay, I didn't really moved on. See, I don't know anything, so
he does VC now.
That's funny.
Yep.
That was short lived then, because he was. Yeah, okay, that's funny, because that was 2019.
Short lived with Amelia there, but he was there. I mean, he helped do the whole sale to
acquisition.
Microsoft. Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a whole conversation with him on the changelog where he tells the tale. He basically came in there, helped sell it to Microsoft, and it was pretty cool the way that it all went down. But
I think I listened to that before my interview with him. And
Okay.
I was like, it's cool having podcast episodes before you do an interview with
Right.
someone, because you can get a
Nice.
sense of
Yeah, we were actually surprised. We didn't know what the conversation was going to be when we recorded that episode. We didn't he was very candid and just he's like, I've never told this story, but I'm going to tell it right now. I was like, okay, because it was kind of the inside story of that acquisition to a certain, from his perspective, obviously.
That's cool.
So that was cool. But then I was like, Amelia, you work there, and then she's like, yeah, but he's gone. Like, oh, okay. I know Jason. Oh, he's gone. Okay.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
So who's the CCO now, Amelia?
We don't have one.
Oh.
Yeah,
So you
we're now
report to the
GitHub Next.
GitHub Next.
Yeah, it's just like an R&D team.
Sure. Still a sweet job.
Oh yeah.
I mean, still the same job that was Octo, basically, because that's what he was doing. Was kind of like, we asked
It
him what he
hasn't
does, and he's like, my
changed a
job is
lot.
like 10 years from now stuff.
Yeah.
When he was there. So solid. All right. Should we get back in?
Yep.
Did either of you have you're both leaning in, so feel free to.
All Nick.
Nick,
Okay.
you haven't said
Sure.
anything yet, basically. Besides,
Yeah.
you said TypeScript once. That's the only word you've said.
I started foaming at the mouth a little bit.
Every next job is every 20 minutes. He just mumbles TypeScript.
TypeScript. So yeah, that was a fascinating story, kind of giving us an intro to Solid and kind of what it is and its origins. And I love that it's bringing back what's old is new. Back in my day, we used to say Dojo already did that. And I love that you can look at hooks and be like, solid influenced that. That was a solid
Nice.
influence.
Oh, word of the day.
I wanted to kind of dig a little deeper into it and kind of understand a little bit more. And so I've been doing React for years and kind of the reactive style development in Dojo and things like that. But I am probably not up to speed on all of the terminology. And so one thing that you mentioned, I think around hooks or what they're called in Solid was composable primitives. Can you define that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's the idea that you can take, I'll use React as an example because people aren't familiar, but you can take use state and then be like, oh, actually, I want local storage. I want the state to always store in local storage. So you can make use local state. And now you've just replaced it in file, maybe just rename the import, so to speak, and now you have this new kind of enhanced functionality, and you can wrap obviously effects in it and memos and state, and this kind of pattern of taking these building blocks of smaller core pieces to make things that are specific for you and your app. And we've seen repos like that, like React Views, and I think Vue has one too, and Solid has one called Solid Primitives. This idea of kind of building these building blocks out of these primitives, because the thing is, the primitives themselves contain the full life cycle of the updates and the rendering of your components. So it's really nice pattern, because once you make it about the data, you can group the behaviors together. And anyone who's seen the intro to React Hooks talks understands this now. But I mean, that was actually a pretty hard thing to explain before React Hooks. Marketing's always hard, I suppose. But in general, like this kind of ability to put data and its behavior together and then package them up. That's what I mean by composable primitives. To me, that is like the single most important thing in not the single, but one of the most important things in JavaScript frameworks. This ability to be extensible in a way that feels native to it, like part of the language. It's not enough to just have like state. You need to be able to have derived state and whatnot.
Yeah.
I feel like one of the things I'm always fighting with React is performance. I guess maybe just because I do a lot of data stuff, and data is expensive, and when you change it, and there's a lot of elements that reload, and I think you get a lot of wins for free if you switch. I don't think Solid is using a VDOM. Instead, it's using reactivity. I'd love if you could go into that a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting, because this is a much grayer scale than people might realize, because a lot of the marketing, this is how frameworks differentiate themselves. But generally speaking, most frameworks kind of, you have a component and you change something and the component re-renders. So if you had some data and you say have a list of to-dos, I don't know, I mean, this is a terrible example, but everyone knows it, and you update it to done on one of those to-dos, it goes, okay, rerun the component, rerun the list, figure out what's changed, and update the DOM. And that in itself was always really, really slow. So people had kind of come up in the early 2012-13 time period, kind of maybe even earlier, I guess, when I consider knockout, but ways to kind of just separate that from the render cycle. Just use events to update one specific part of the DOM. Like you start going, well, why do all this work when you can just, click the button, update the text? Like don't do all this re-rendering stuff. And the biggest thing about the VDOM was React showed that you could actually do this top-down re-render the component thing and it not be that bad. Like as long as you weren't reading from the DOM, causing layout shifts, or you weren't like doing a bunch of updates all over the place, like unbatched and things ping-ponging around, you could just make this virtual object and diff it, and the performance was good enough. It was pretty good, and that's kind of the attractive part of the VDOM. But that made sense purely runtime. What we've seen now is this kind of shift to reactivity, and maybe no VDOM, because with a compiler per se, you can kind of separate stuff out. And what like Svelte does is instead of having like our VDOM representation, it just goes, here's the code that runs on creation, here's the code that runs on update. Like just looking at the code, we can tell from the syntax, and goes, when it creates, run this code, when it updates, run this code. And then it does a very simple diff, because whenever the component needs to rerun, it goes, oh, okay, this data didn't change, so you don't have to do anything. This data didn't change, you don't have to do anything. Oh, this thing changed, I'll update it. And this is drastically lighter abstraction, and it used a compiler to write it out. I am getting to my point here. Solid's actually a little bit different, because a lot of people would assume maybe it works like that, but the thing with Solid's approach is it is kind of back to that. It's just an event approach. It does use a compiler, but instead of kind of using the compiler to reinforce a component model, it uses the compiler to basically turn every little expression in your JSX into a reactive computation. I don't know if that's clear to people. For a React dev, I just tell them it creates a use effect everywhere. Like essentially, like you write some JSX and I turn the JSX into a bunch of use effects, and each of those use effects run independently like events. That's probably a terrible explanation. It's so much easier to show this than explain it, but
Really stupid question. So if I write everything in one component versus if I compartmentalize everything into separate components, are you saying the performance is basically the same?
yeah, it was solid because it's not the components that rerun. It's just the hooks that rerun. So whether you put them all in the same component or spread them out, and this is a big kind of fundamental shift because it's not about performance in the sense like, oh, this is faster. It's about like, do you need to be aware of this when you author your code, right? And when you build React apps, you're like, oh, okay, this is a component boundary. I'm doing a loop, so I want to push the state into the item because I don't want to rerun the whole loop. So you kind of do this game of hoisting and pushing down state to make the performance optimal. And the component boundaries really matter. And a lot of the arguments I was making is reactive systems feeding into component libraries, maybe they're better at memoizing, but they still cause this re-trigger a lot of times. And it does matter how they break stuff apart, even if it's like downplayed. So, and quite often the thing is for those libraries, the components are the heavy piece. You don't want more components because that's when they bring in their instances and their reactivity, and the components become this kind of thing that are actually expensive. So you'll find like with Vue and Svelte, you actually tend to lean towards less components from a performance standpoint because you don't want the overhead of components. So there's this interesting kind of thing. Vue's actually one of the most interesting ones to me because they have a VDOM, which makes them want more components, and they want a reactive system that makes them want to use less components. So it's like a tension that always kind of works with them. But with Solid, I was like, if components stopped being the thing, maybe you could just not care about that, like not have that influence how you author your components at all. It's just a matter of like having the stuff update where it updates. The trick to that is everything is lazily evaluated, and I mean that's getting more technical. But if you picture everything as being getters in the component tree, when you pass props through, like prop drill, like in React, through your component tree, we don't bind it to anything. We don't do any extra work at the component boundaries. It's just a getter, so that we just defer evaluating that prop all the way down to where it's used in the DOM. And that, I mean, it's technical, but it basically flattens the tree to the point that you still are dealing with the old event where you're like, here, update the state, and then it's just going to, almost like a stream, like a pipe, it's just going to go straight to that DOM node that's down 3 components deep and just update that text node. It doesn't rerun any of the components in between. So yeah, I don't know how much that makes sense over audio, but that's kind of the mentality here.
It makes sense, I think. I'm trying to put it together as like a mental model. And you mentioned like the JSX being basically turned into a use effect. Like, is one key thing there that it's specifically the JSX and not like the component itself? So like, because I think one thing I read about Solid is that a component function will run only once, which is very different from React. Is that kind of a big fundamental difference?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's the hooks that run multiple times. And generally speaking, it's not like we always wrap all the JSX in a single effect, so to speak. We just break apart the DOM operations, and it's kind of like you set it and then forget it kind of thing. It's very declarative kind of model where in the same way you declare like some hooks, you're just like, okay, make this effect that updates the title. The JSX kind of does that too. It just goes, oh, make this binding that updates this text on this DOM node. And once it's set, it's that one thing that will rerun. We don't rerun components.
This all sounds amazing, and I'm really excited to try it out because it sounds like it solves a lot of problems I'm always running into. Are there any trade-offs there?
Yeah, there is, because this mental model, I mean, run once should raise flags for some people immediately, simply because like how does anything change, right? It might be easy enough for me to say, oh, you just wrap stuff in effects and you can kind of picture some attributes on a DOM element or something changing. But it's top level stuff that gets a little bit more interesting, because essentially when things are accessed outside of a reactive scope, and this is the same to a certain degree with Vue, and it's the same thing if you've ever used MobX, they don't track. So then people are going to go, oh, where did my reactivity go? So like the number one rule of learning Solid generally is don't destructure props. This drives React devs absolutely nuts, and people try and come up with really interesting solutions to solve it. And there are solutions to, quote, solve it, but they're all complicated and they all involve like magic. Like they all involve like making certain assumptions that I generally am not as comfortable making. I mean, to be fair, it's not unlike the ESLint rules around the dependency arrays in React. Like Solid doesn't have those dependency arrays, so like you don't need to write them, so we don't have that rule. But on the destructuring side, we do have ESLint rules to say, hey, don't destructure. But again, there's always an exception to every rule, and it's the thing. I'd say that one, and then top level control flow, like early returns. Like if you just go, if this return here, it's never going to run again, so it's never going to hit the other branch. So
Right.
generally speaking, the control flow, I mean, you could do it a couple ways. You could use the reactive system, but generally, for the most part, you just put the control flow in the JSX. You just put it in the fragment. You know, if there's two different exits, just, you know, make a JSX fragment or a ternary operator, and just put it in there, and then it'll handle it. It does take a little bit of adjustment, but I feel once you're at least familiar with the pattern, you kind of can get in a flow with it. But it does mean, as you can kind of guess, like React compat is not on the menu, so to speak. Like the execution is very different. There's no use ref. There's no use callback. These concepts make no sense in Solid because the thing doesn't run again. So it doesn't port right away. I think a good heuristic for people is like once you get to a point where you use ref for something that is not a DOM element, that's the point at which it doesn't port directly to Solid, and you have to kind of think about it a bit. Fortunately, when you get to the point when you have to use ref for not a DOM element, that's usually the point where people start cursing hooks. So it's about the same threshold.
I just think it's funny that, you know, people will go out of their way to try and bring back that, like, the ability to destructure and like, you know, that the patterns that we're familiar with in React, when that is so much more complicated than what's actually happening here.
Yeah, but I mean, one of the cool things about being built on these primitives, and this is the most wild thing I've found about Solid, is we don't have that many component libraries yet. Some people, so there's a Solid Bootstrap that's finished up, but we don't have like material designed yet, or carbon components, or reach components. There's a whole bunch of stuff and it works. But we have like 3 or 4 projects, actually probably more than that, where people have just taken Solid and built a compiler in front of it to use the syntax of their choice. Like there's like Svelte to Solid and like this. We have more thing. People really care about that syntax element. And honestly, that wasn't like, as I mentioned earlier, that wasn't like my goal. That wasn't where I was going to. I just wanted these reusable primitives. What people found is because the building blocks are so exposed and so easy, it's not that difficult to just build that kind of, you know, if you want Svelte looking thing, they can just build it on top and still kind of benefit from some of the other cool stuff about Solid in terms of performance and whatnot. Like there's always trade-offs, right? Like perfect examples, like if you go strictly to like the Svelte type syntax with the lets and the dollar signs, is challenging. Like Svelte has a different mechanism to that. They have like use stores, which is completely separate than the reactive language, right? So, you know, that's one of those kind of trade-offs. It's much easier to do local optimized compilation than cross files. So like it makes sense, but you know, it's what do you value? As I said, I super value composition, so that wasn't the direction I took. But you know, if people don't care about that element, you know, then they can do it. And I think that's the coolest part about having adaptable building blocks, things that aren't necessarily configurable, complex, but just little things that can be used in lots of different ways.
Break right there. That was a good break right there. Little things that can be used in lots of ways. Fade in the music. This episode is brought to you by Raygun. Just
Nice.
guessing. Just guessing. GitHub's Office of the CTO next.
The next office of the CTO.
Next office of the CTO. So, Amelia, if you eventually become CTO, then technically you are working at the next office of the CTO.
That would be the worst CTO. Nobody wants that.
I don't know. I
We're
think
switching to solid.
We're switching to solid. Yeah.
Let's see how that would go over. It's funny because, as I said, I work at eBay, and there's it's interesting because a lot of people want to use React, and there's some realities there. Anyways, it's a whole different.
We could bring that into the
topic.
show. if you're willing
No,
to
no,
talk
no.
about it.
Actually, if there was something that I wanted that I would say leave off, I don't mind talking about eBay and Marco, but I don't want to talk about internal politics at eBay. That's one thing I'm not going to put on this show.
Sure.
Seems smart.
Certainly. Does anybody have a solid direction for the next segment? I was gonna cover. We haven't talked about the benchmarks, but I don't know. They're not all that interesting. They're interesting, but community reaction. I think community. The momentum maybe. Who's using it? Who's contributing? What's the next 6 to 12 months look like? Where does it stand? 1.0 obviously is. 1.0 is out there. That's what you said, right? It's out there.
Yeah, 1.0
Yeah.
was this summer. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we
So-
could talk a bit about where things are heading and some of the community growth stuff. I guess that makes sense. I think we covered the technical stuff for the most part.
Yeah.
I'm trying
It's
think
always
if
hard to go
there's-
deep on tech on podcasts, in
Yeah,
audio. But I think you guys did a pretty good job. At least differentiating and explaining some things that'll, if nothing else, will provide hooks. No pun not intended, but appreciated. Into to look deeper.
Yeah, I should have warned people about puns at the beginning because this Solid just brings them out all the time.
We haven't gotten any on the actual podcast.
No, it's all been there in
Just
the
gonna
breaks.
point that out.
Yeah, fair enough.
not
Nick,
true.
did you
I said
notice I
one.
put Pee Wee Herman on your exciting episode? Did you listen to that one? You must not have, because you would have totally noticed.
Exciting. Which one?
The episode where you just kept saying, "I'm so excited," and then you're like, "It's the word of the day, ah!" and you screamed.
I did not listen to it. I will though.
You got it
It's in my
now.
list.
You can just listen to it's like first 5 minutes. That's right
Yeah.
there. It's Pee Wee Herman's. Every time somebody says the word, scream, and then it goes, ah! I just figured solid could be the word of the day, but it's too late. Too late.
It's not. It's
Yeah,
never too late.
Yeah. Okay. For next segment, yeah, because we can talk about the future. We can talk about features and kind of stuff a bit on that side, less on the. I agree with you. The benchmarks are pretty much uninteresting at this point. We already basically covered them in the first segment when I
Yeah.
basically said that they were uninteresting. So
It's fast and they haven't changed for 6 years.
but, yeah, exactly. So
Fair enough. All right.
People are asking about the meta frameworks too.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
that's going to come in the next segment.
Okay. I will kick us in and we'll take it from there. So 1.0 happened last summer. There's traction now. There's people talking about it. You got JS Party interested. Tell us about the community. Obviously, when you pick something not as big as React, you miss out on opportunities for community contributed libraries and plugins and example code and all these things. And so that's always something that the smaller, more indie projects really have to fight against. But it seems like you do have some traction, you have some momentum. Can you tell us who else is using Solid? About the team behind it? Is it just yourself still? Are there people involved? What's the momentum look like? What does the future look like? Give us that picture.
Yeah, I couldn't be happier in the way that the community has developed around Solid. It's taken time. It's been slow. Mostly because at the beginning I wasn't really looking to do much. I brought a couple other people in kind of on the core team to help with the website and the docs, and it's grown down to 6 members and even more people around the ecosystem who are contributing. There's a good solid group of contributors. Yeah, I knew I was gonna do that at some point, or someone was gonna do that. Contributors, a couple dozen people that kind of participate in the Discord, help on the various projects. That I couldn't be happier about. I think the biggest thing that I like about our community is because Solid's built on this transparency, like just like everyone knows how the framework works or feels like they can build it. We kind of really fostered or been trying to foster a community where it's all about like it's not about like maybe cultish following, so to speak. Like it's not about like this is the only solution. Trying to kind of teach people to look at performance, look at metrics, and look at trade-offs, and really have a deep understanding. And I think that kind of reflects in the way the community is out there. I have to admit, it does set a bunch of people out on the world who are kind of like, well, actualing people on Twitter and stuff. But for the most part, I'm really happy how there's been a really open discourse to kind of make improvements and look at the web in general, and even keep our community close to other projects that are looking at that, things like Astro or Quick or Marco, which I also work on, just kind of sharing of ideas. And I think that's really exciting. That is one of the benefits you do get on the indie side, so to speak, because you have a bunch of like small parties that are all like they know they're the small players. They're not the giants in this, so they're much more likely to be comrades, so to speak.
Well, it's easier to get a seat at the table, right? Because you have more opportunity, have influence, and to help, and feel like your contributions really do move the needle. In a larger community, you can feel like you're trying to help, or you're trying to pitch in, or you're trying to evangelize, and it's like you're just one of like thousands of other people doing that kind of thing. But smaller communities, you can have more real impact, it seems like, at least at the start.
Yeah, and especially that, and the factor that you have, like, as I said, other smaller communities kind of coming together, because there isn't, like, maybe the rivalry hasn't formed yet, maybe the lines haven't been drawn, is something I've been finding really interesting.
Would you like to start a rivalry right now? Would you like to pick somebody as an enemy?
No.
Or a frenemy?
No.
How about Marco JS? I hear that's the worst.
Yeah. My work on Marco is part of actually what I think leads to that, because I work on two frameworks. There's no way I could possibly, and they're at times very opposite sides. Like one's single page app, one's multi-page app. One Solid, I've already told you about the modularity and the composability. Marco is like on the svelte side of things. So like it's like these are very kind of opposite things, and because of that, and because of my work and the way I talk about it, I think it kind of always has this kind of even keel sort of feel, and I think that kind of permeates through the community, and have others feel like it's a safe place to talk about ideas and kind of push the web forward. Like this morning, for example, Misco, heavy creator of Angular, and Quick actually just popped right on our server general and just dropped in his latest tutorial video for Quick. Had nothing to do with Solid, but he knows our community is like super stoked about everything that's happening in web dev, and everything that cuts cuts cutting edge, whether it's Solid specific or not. And I think it's a community of early adopters. I love that kind of atmosphere.
Hey Ryan, real quick, I think your mic might be rubbing on your shirt. It just started happening. I'm catching a little bit of like a crinkle as you talk, so just be aware of that.
I'll stop rocking back and forth. This is what I get.
The rocking is cool as long as you can. Some people will hold their mic if it's a lapel kind of a thing. So I just want to say that. Otherwise, those little sounds are like the hardest part to keep clean in the produced one. So, Nick or Amelia, do you want to hop in at this point as I cut him off and direct towards more or different? We're talking Marco and the difference between the two projects.
If you want to finish, Ryan, that's also...
Yeah, because,
you weren't done. You stopped talking for a second, so I thought maybe you were...
Yeah, because I was...
keep going. We'll drop a marker right here. Just keep going. Yeah.
On the other side, though, the other side of your question, that's a community, and that's a community that's been growing. The hackathon that we actually started, which is a 3-month-long hackathon, launched in January, ends in April, is really kind of pushing new people to come in and try Solid for the first time. So I think that there's a lot of room for growth. We did this long hackathon not because we didn't want people to feel pressured. We just want them to give it a shot, try it out, maybe like it, and kind of spend the time to put in a library that people can continue to use. So this has been a slow growth, But as I said, I couldn't be happier with where that's going. On the on the topic of like where Solid's heading, which is what you're kind of doing with what you asked about, 1.0 took a long time for us to get to 1.0. It came out this summer, and mostly delayed because of server-side rendering. I built a framework that was designed for client-side rendering primarily, and then in the process, everyone wanted server-side rendering. So I looked into it and got better at that and figured out how we could do that. Since 1.0, we've added a lot of interesting features, stuff like concurrent rendering, universal renderers, which are like the ability to support things like maybe Solid Native or Solid GL. And most recently, we added support for HTML streaming. And the reason, these are all just building blocks that we've been trying to piece together to complete that story, so people have the fundamental pieces they would need to try Solid in a number of different applications. But we're kind of switching gears a bit now. Now that we've kind of shown what Solid's capable of, shown like the different avenues you could take it, we're now kind of taking another cycle where we want to make it easier for people to use, easier for people to kind of come in for the first time, use the SSR or whatnot. And a big part of that actually has been work towards developing our own sort of starter meta framework thing. You've seen CellKit, you've seen Remix recently, obviously there's Next.js and a bunch of other things. Sometime about last March, kind of started on this, and as I've mentioned, we've done a lot this year, so I haven't given it as much focus to now, but we're taking it seriously. That's the number one question people ask. Besides, is there a component library? Is there a way that we can just get started with Solid in like a full stack SSR kind of way? And the answer to that very soon should be yes. I've been using it for a lot of our demos. If people have checked them out, I've been basically making Hacker News demos and posting them all over the internet on every different cloud provider, whether it's Netlify functions or Cloudflare workers or Vercel Edge. I've been using the kind of early alpha version of this Solid Start, which is what we've kind of dubbed the starter, as a way of kind of proving out the ability to have Solid completely at the edge with all the modern conveniences like, as I said, streaming, suspense on the server, and whatnot, all from the edge. And I've been really happy kind of exploring that, especially Cloudflare workers. And Vercel Edge, which is built on Cloudflare workers, is really, really cool technology. And I definitely see a lot of the frameworks are spending a lot of time here, and I think it's really, I think it's going to be really change the way we approach kind of building apps in a sense. I know like there's different scales and different companies have different needs, but it's quite likely that this sort of edge worker approach is almost like the new Jamstack. When you can build it so close to the edge, you don't necessarily need to be static. But what's really interesting is there's like new technology tricks, new ways to get performance. So I'm all in there trying to push boundaries and see what we can do.
I'm curious with adoption, how has that changed after 1.0? And also, is there like a certain of people that you find are using Solid more than others?
Yeah, it definitely has. There's definitely now a sense that like it's worth investing in certain things. Like people were very relatively resistant, let's say, from investing in, say, creating certain types of libraries, like component libraries, things that were big, big investments in time before 1.0. That's kind of changed. A lot of people are actually trying that. The other thing I'm starting to see is, yes, smaller companies, projects, things like that, where people are coming and are like, hey, we want to use Solid for that. There's been a sprinkling over the years, but there's just been more and more of that. Part of the way we were able to get sponsors for this hackathon was these companies actually want to invest in Solid because they want to get people to learn Solid so they can hire people in Solid. Companies like 402, and a few others that are sponsoring the hackathon are kind of, giving in to give back to give in. You know what I mean? Like it essentially, by putting stuff into Solid, putting stuff into community, it kind of pays it back to themselves as well. So yeah, this is a big difference from when I was doing this by myself, to kind of see people excited to use it in their projects.
Well, this has been a solid roundup of everything solid. Ryan, is there anything left on the table? Things that you were hoping we'd ask you, or things you would like to say, places to point people to get started, or where the community gathers that we haven't talked about yet that you'd like to say as we tail off?
Yeah, I mentioned it a bit before, but I think the website is actually has a ton of resources on it. We've been trying really hard to gather as many resources as we can in terms of libraries, articles, videos, and there's a tutorial on there, very influenced by Svelte style tutorial. There's 40 different lessons you can use to learn Solid. I think it's a great starting place, at least for anyone who is familiar with other JavaScript frameworks. It's a very quick reference to go like, oh, this is how I do it in Solid. There's also the Discord. That's where we live. It's been growing rapidly over the last few months, and if you want a question answered, honestly, just jump in there. It's all linked off the website, but that's where we live. We're like always online, so do come in, join the community, say hi. That's definitely the best way to get connected with us.
Excellent. Nick and/or Amelia, any nagging questions that you haven't had a chance to ask yet?
When are you getting poached by Vercel?
Good one.
Man.
Good one.
That was floating around for a bit. Yeah, I don't know about that, but I mean, they were very, very stoked about the demo. I didn't realize this at the time, but I did that Hack News demo on Vercel Edge with streaming and transitions and suspense and everything, and I assumed that's what everyone would like. That's what Next 12 was doing, and all that, and that was a demo. But I was actually mistaken. I basically had kind of reverse hacked Next.js to get a full Solid app running on the Edge within 12 hours of the Vercel announcement, and they were like,
Nice.
whoa, this is really cool. So they reached out to me in terms of getting a Solid integration. So yeah, I don't know about them hiring me, so to speak, but I've been working with them recently on a Solid integration. So our new starter, Solid Start, it does actually show up in the integration list on Vercel, so you can create an app right away with that and have it deploy to Vercel Edge with all the bells and whistles, so to speak.
Solid.
Solid.
And I'll just throw out not a question really, but more of a statement, I guess. That there was a tweet I think yesterday by Ryan Florence, one of the creators of Remix, talking about how the world seems to be ready for the post React world, and he mentions both Solid and Marco in that in the tweet. So just really cool being able to talk to you about that, being able to talk to you about the potential other side of this React coin that we've been in for quite a while, and very exciting stuff. I'm really excited to learn more and to unlearn some of the things that I'm doing in React.
Yeah, the React community especially has been more supportive than I would have ever imagined. I don't know how to place it. Maybe it's the philosophical similarities. Maybe they see the same kind of driving motivations and goals that are in React that have allowed them to attach themselves to it, because we've had really good responses from Ryan Florence and Michael Jackson from Remix, just people like Mark Deglish with Vanilla Extract, David Piano, like just a lot of people, Tanner Lindsay, like a lot of people working around the libraries in React who, maybe they've struggled with hooks, but they generally like the model. But I think they can see that Solid kind of carries a bit of the torch, the same kind of mentality as React. And I didn't expect that at first. As I said, I thought it would be like the compiler reactive people. But I think those kind of things that might seem more like on the surface actually maybe make a bigger difference in how we choose the frameworks and tools that we like to use, more so than I would have expected. It's been incredible to see the React community on that. When people kind of discover reactivity for the first time because of Solid, and someone has to point out to them, they're like, this is kind of like how Vue works, right? Like Vue's been doing this also this whole time. There are differences, but like the reactive part, and it's just because maybe something about the way Vue showed its reactivity, or the kind of mental model abstraction like Svelte or whatever, on that side, it just never clicked. And I think the React community has been so supportive in that sense. It's funny, the more like religious wars I actually have is with other reactive libraries. It's like Solid's a traitor.
Well, there you have it. Your opportunity for a rivalry can be with the other reactive libraries. We can get a real barn burner going. Well, Ryan, thanks so much for joining the show, telling us about Solid. Thanks for all your hard work on this cool and interesting and exciting, to use Nick's word, option in the front end space. We have lots of options, but that's what innovation is, right? We continue to push and change and try new things and push the industry forward and bring everybody along with us along the way. So thanks for all your hard work on that. To our listener, we have all of the links to all the things in the show notes, so check those for all the places to go to learn more about Solid, as well as the Solid Start meta framework that Ryan mentioned there at the end. We'll have everything linked to Holla one more time at JSConf Mexico. Check out those YouTube videos. They are uploaded in both languages. On behalf of Amelia Wattenberger and Nick Nisi, I'm Jerod Santo, and this has been JS Party. We'll catch y'all next week. All right. Good stuff, y'all. You're now in the post party, the after party.
I'm around with it, so I'm convinced.
Are you going to?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
immediately.
We'll need a follow up at some point. Like, Amelia played with Solid, and this is what she thinks. So
I'm always like, it's really interesting because like I've seen people come from all different backgrounds to try Solid, and there are different patterns or trends that I've seen, but it's always this Svelte side that I'm like the most scared of, because like there's like this opposite mentality there where like I choose to make things harder on purpose. and like
you should have said that one on the show.
Nah.
Yeah.
He's been holding
Here
that
comes
back.
the truth.
Yeah.
What I didn't tell you guys is this thing is terrible to work with on purpose. No.
No, not terrible to work with, but just like choose to
Harder.
make certain things harder, like, or more explicit, right? And I think that's always interesting because it takes knowing why, and that's not a short explanation always. So, it's one of those things where like I hope people give the time or patience, because as I said, the hardest part with Solid is it's very easy to just dismiss it when you first look at it. And even at every point of the onboarding or learning process of Solid, it's really easy to dismiss it because of, anyway, I can talk about Solid very.
It's all about positioning, right? Like every word you put on that landing page or the beginning of the tutorial matters, because something could turn people off or get people excited.
Well, if you sell it on Amelia, she's a Svelte person, so you'll be on cloud 9. And
I actually use React more than I use Svelte, but I wish I didn't.
so that still makes you a Svelte person. See?
That
I
you
guess
like
so.
Svelte more.
that range is actually okay for us. People who have some like of React, then it's usually okay. It's just on like the hard Svelte side. Like I can like there's no convincing that side. I just kind of leave it and go, okay, that's fine.
Well,
People get weirdly religious about Svelte, and then like Rich is like the god of Svelte.
right.
I think it's funny.
Well, the good news is you don't have to have everybody use your library.
Not
I mean,
at
it's
all.
not like a winner take all situation. There's so many web devs that it's like all these
So
things can
many.
thrive and provide options for people, and some people prefer that, and some people prefer this. And if we can all build better apps with these tools, then we're all better off. But I do know the desire to have to convince everybody why your thing is awesome.
Well, especially if like the naysayers are saying things that you don't agree with.
Yeah,
That's
or
gonna
that you
be
think are
super
false
frustrating.
conceptions. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't get onto this on the stream, but I didn't think of it until just now. I didn't a bit of an interesting journey at the beginning because I wasn't on social, I wasn't anywhere or anyone, so I was like a nobody coming into social.
You are somebody. Come on,
No,
man.
but like in 2019,
You
I
don't have
was
to be on
basically
Twitter to be somebody.
no, but there was no presence. So I'd come in and someone would say something that I needed to not be said, or because like it undermined what I was doing with Solid. Essentially, like things like JSX can't be analyzed, or like whatever kind of statement that. And this was like popular libraries, big names saying this stuff, and I'd kind of come in and be like, not necessarily, there's this here, there's this, and it was just like it was a real uphill battle for the first couple of years there, because it was just kind of like, I would say stuff and give evidence, and then it'd be those like back and forth, so someone would be like, they get like a whole bunch of like likes, and then no one likes what I say, and then you know what I mean, like it's
Sure.
the social phenomenon of that whole thing. It took a while for me as someone new to navigate around that, so I don't know. It is what it is. Maybe it's better that it wasn't on stream, but you know what I mean.
Sure.
It's an interesting dynamic that when you kind of play into that kind of echo chamber. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the religious wars have casualties. You gotta have thick skin, otherwise you may be one.